Okay, so this is the sixth video lecture on the topic of race and ethnicity. It's our very last one. I left off talking about some of the different ways that groups can relate to each other, from genocide down to multiculturalism. In this one, I just want to talk about sort of the relative rank, and I don't know, that's not a good choice of words, but the relative well-being, right? The relative well-being of these different groups. Um, yeah, so you'll see over here on the right is a chart, kind of what I was just suggesting before. By 2055, it's estimated by 2015, what we had about 62% of the population was white, about 18 was Hispanic, blah blah, and then by 2065, it's estimated that 2055, it's estimated that white people will be less than half with other groups making up. And you'll notice this is also something that's really interesting to me in American history, is that the proportion of Black people, portion of Black Americans basically stays the same. It runs from about 12 to 13%. So it's interesting when you start talking about, representation and disproportionate. If there are more than 15% of any social demographic group that is Black, that would be an overrepresentation. It would be so easy, I think, to represent all of the different groups, in television and various things. It wouldn't be that hard to find 15% or 20 or 18 or 20%. Okay, so anyway, so you have European Americans, right? This would be white folk like myself. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. So white obviously refers to one's complexion. Anglo-Saxon are people that are descendants from, or his ancestry goes back to England, Europe and England, and then Protestant would be the non-Catholics. So a white ethnic would be somebody who might be from that part of the world, but they might be Catholic, right? So Irish people or Polish, or these would be white ethnic groups, because Anglo-Saxon are those that kind of come from England, or descendants from the Vikings, and then Protestants are obviously not Catholics. Okay, so if you ever hear people talk about WASPs or blue bloods, right? People that came over on the Mayflowers, they were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They were not Catholic, and they were from England, most of them. There is a quiz question about name a white ethnic group. So Irish, Polish, German, Russian, groups like that. Latinos and Hispanics. This is one that I was thinking about in a previous lecture, how these routinely get confused. They are not the same thing, right? These are ethnic groups. These are not racial groups. Well, same thing with white ethnic groups. Or ethnic groups are not racial groups, and how they don't mean the same thing. And I just want to make sure I got this right. Latinos refer to people who are from Latin America, right? Hispanics refer to people who speak Spanish. A lot of groups are both Latino and Hispanic, and those terms in that case can be used interchangeably, but some are not. For instance, people from Brazil are Hispanic, but they are not Latinos. They are from, got that wrong. They are Latinos, but they're not Hispanic. That's right. They're from Latin America, but because they don't speak Spanish, they're not Hispanic. And then people from Spain are Hispanic, but they're not Latinos, right? So again, this is another really good example of how we've lumped all these folks together and we've kind of called them the same thing, and they're not the same thing. African Americans, or Black. Now, I use Black because of a book I read many years ago that pointed out the fact that not all people who are Black would consider themselves African. I don't call myself a European American. A lot of Black people are descendants from folks that arrived, after white people did, or after, people from England did. So I used Black as a descriptor, because if we're talking about race, Black is a race. White, if we're talking about that idea, Black and white are race. Instead of assume someone's heritage, or instead of assume someone's ancestry, right? And again, only make up about 13% of the population in the United States, and it's been a very steady 13%. Other groups, so Asian is another one that is really a very, very broad group of people who would fall into this category, people from Japan, China, India, and Korean. And I think that that's so interesting because when I typically think of Asian, I don't typically think of Indian and Pakistani people as falling into that category. This category, this group of folks are typically considered the model minority. And what that means, I say it in air quotes, because as a group that is considered highly assimilated, certainly Chinese, Japanese, Americans, Korean Americans, and well, actually all of them, highly assimilated in terms of their education, um, very low divorce rates, very high educational attainment rates, very low poverty rates and such. The group that has the poorest social indicators, in other words, is most likely to live in poverty, is most likely to suffer from um, various indicators of well being, are the indigenous peoples or First Peoples or Native Americans. And again, I don't like to, I'm reluctant to use Native Americans because American is a term that was given by the European white people who came here and called this America, right? It's not, that is a colonizer imposing the name of a people on them as opposed to the peoples naming themselves. So a term that I've been trying to use more is indigenous people, referring to the people that were here first or First Peoples, recognizing that within that group there was an abundance of different kinds of people groups that all had distinctive cultures. So again, that's a difficult one. It's also interesting that the percentage of people who have acknowledged or claimed an identity in this group has gone up in the last 20 years. Probably because in the 70s, it wasn't cool. It was one of the like let's assimilate here, and so people didn't claim their identity. But now there's less stigma. And then you get to the Middle Eastern groups that are, yeah, Middle Eastern groups, which include, the people from Libya, Turkey, Iran, and Iraq, and of course they suffer from all of those stereotypes that they must all be terrorists. And then the census I believe it started in 2000 was the first one that allowed, might have been 2010, that allowed for people to claim two or more racial and ethnic groups. But before then, you had to force yourself into a category. And that, you'll remember, is one of those theories about race, racial formation theory, that says that racial awareness and racial categorizing is really a product of the government that says you have to pick one of these categories. But beginning in one of the 2000 censuses, you could choose if you wanted to be more than one. Okay, this wraps up the end of race and ethnicity. Thank you for listening.